Well, we were very fortunate to have you come all the way from Australia to give us a wonderful presentation. You talked about BGP in 2023, which is very catchy, by the way. Good title. You're known for addressing the elephant in the room in a wonderfully charming way, though, right? And bringing harsh truth to light. Why did you choose these particular elephants in the room to this community?
Because what we tell ourselves is years out of date and reality is different. The mobile phone industry took us all by surprise. But what's really taken us by surprise is that the old telephone industry was an industry of scarcity. We're living in a world of abundance. Memory may not be any faster, but there's a lot of it, processing. So what has that meant for the internet? Oddly enough, the change is dramatic, and it's only happened in the last 10 years. The rise of content distribution says that I have enough memory, I have enough resources, that instead of you coming to Seattle, Washington, or my data center in Dallas from all over the world, I'm going to bring the data to your doorstep. I'm going to come to your city with a data center. All of the Netflix catalog is only a couple of miles away, if that. Because I have enough computing, enough resources, enough memory to make sure that those catalog of data is current. You know, well, that's really good. And it is. Distance is cost. When you bring the content close to the user, I can go really, really fast, and it costs almost nothing. So I can replace broadcast television with on-demand programming in all of those video streamers. This is great. But what does routing mean in a world where the content is a mile away from the consumer? There is no routing. Fine, that's a harsh truth. What about all these BGP people? Well, that's quaint, but irrelevant. What about routing security? Well, what about routing security? It doesn't matter. Because there is no routing. If you're a large content network, your job is to be beside the user. And if you're beside the user, there's no long-distance network. There's no transit. There's no value in that role. There's no need for it. And what we're doing is taking all the old traditional networking truths, you must know routing, and so on. And it's kind of, well, so what? Let's go further. Because we used to think that everything needed an IP address. And the whole reason why we did V6 was because 4 billion addresses wasn't enough.
Let me ask you about that in particular.
Well, this is the next harsh truth.
Yes, yeah.
Because the harsh truth is, we ran out of addresses from almost the first dial-up modem. Because oddly enough, the computer at the other end was one address, one connection. But what if you weren't connected? Oh, I'll give the address to someone else because you're not using it. So we started sharing at the client. And what that meant was you could actually run an ISP with 10 addresses and have 1,000 customers, as long as not all 1,000 try to ring him up. Easy. 10 modems, 10 addresses, you're sharing. Clients never needed an address. And as we built more and more of the network, clients never needed an address. And so you look at a network now with easily 10 to 15 billion devices. We only route around 2 billion addresses. So all those other devices, they share. So what's the role of an address? Ooh, fascinating question. It's certainly not to identify a client, because they don't have them. They just borrow an address. Okay, so I don't need addresses for clients. Well, what about servers? Surely servers need addresses. If I was a content distribution network, I would anycast all of my locations, and minimally, I need one address. Oh, sorry, V6. Oh, no, don't worry. I need one address. I really do. So the service doesn't need an address. The collection, the platform of server needs one address. Do addresses matter anymore? Big question. The answer is no, because we're transitioned very subtly but irrevocably to a name-based network. And so all the big content folk behind that one address, or 5 or whatever you want, but it's not a lot, are millions of names. And you're steered by name, not steered by address. So who routes? BGP or the DNS? Names route. The DNS is the new routing protocol. The DNS is the new rendezvous protocol. Let's take this one step further. Because all of a sudden, the infrastructure of the internet is actually not wires, cables and routing anymore. That's been commoditized. It's a valueless activity without any attractive margin. Because, quite frankly, if you're in the cable business, you're struggling for oxygen.
Was IPv6 just a waste of time? Like, why?
It's very hard to be prescient and right.
Yeah.
So it was pretty clear by 1990 that our 1980s architecture of networking, everything needs an address, was not going to be enough. We didn't dream big enough back in 1974. Who can blame them? In 1974, 4 billion addresses was, oh my God, you're crazy. So let's do 32-bit. Anyone who'd come into the room saying, no, we need 64 bits, you could have heard the laughter for years. But by 1990, the answer was, if you need to address everything, 32 bits is probably not enough. Now, the thinking in the 1980s and in the early 90s, let's just increase the address space because it's an address-based architecture. What they didn't figure out was, oddly enough, if you can't do backwards compatibility, if you can't smoothly glide in one over the other, but you actually have to, if you will, run 2 protocols for an indeterminate period, that cost is unbearable. Unbearable. So you look for alternatives. What's the alternative? The path we took. We shared addresses, which for a while in the IETF was, oh my God, you're sharing addresses, do not do this, this is evil. It's kind of, look, bottom line, I've only got so many addresses, let's share them. Let's use NACs like crazy, and we did. How do we distinguish services? By their name. What's the security system of the internet? Well, it's based on domain name certificates. The entire network is now by name. It was easier, and oddly enough cheaper, to do a piecemeal evolution of the internet that didn't need coordination and coordinated action to actually change the entire architecture. Because if you're going to change protocols, the only time you can shut down v4 is when everybody is doing 6. Coordinated action, orchestration, trying to get everyone on the same page. As it's proved, impossible. Oddly enough, what looked to be the really hard job, change the architecture, ended up being the job we took on because we could do it in little bite-sized pieces and do it in a way that no one noticed. And there's as much activity in the namespace as there is in the legacy address space. Mm-hmm. But the transition is harder, sharper, and more focused on the namespace because it's names that drive content, names that drive service, names that drive security. And so some of the things we believed firmly in, know your BGP, secure your routing, all of those things is kind of, well, if you want, but it's not mandatory. You don't need it. You need name-based security. You need a domain name certificate. No browser in the world is going to go to your website if it doesn't have a name certificate. I don't have routing security. Okay. I don't have V6. Half of the American populace is served by providers that don't have V6. They don't seem to be missing out. So V6 is not mandatory, despite what everyone says. And the other thing about this is the bits we change to make V6 better are the bits that are giving us headaches all the way down the line. The most fundamental cut through. Why IP in the first place? Because at the time, there were X25 networks whose packet size was only so big. There were Ethernet networks whose packet size was this big. There were FTDI networks that had a different packet size. How do I straddle all of those? How do I make an network. Well, that'd be fragmentation on the fly. If the packet is too big for the next hop, bring out the packet carving knife, chop it up and send the bits on their merry way. That's why we did it, because it just worked in a whole bunch of places where nothing else worked. What did V6 do? Well, you can't do that at V6. It's the new innovation. You can't do the one thing that made V4 the fundamentally innovative protocol. Why weren't we paying attention to go stop? Oddly enough, that's the bit that's going to give us heartburn today. And so now when we look at, I need to increase DNS security. Fine thing, DNS is everything. Oh, that means I've got to carry crypto in the DNS. Fine thing. That means DNS gets too big. Too big for what? Well, too big for a 1500 octet payload. So what do you need to do? I need to fragment. Oh, you just said the naughty word. I can't do fragmentation. And so this kind of builds on and on. But what I think the real message is, as this uncoordinated industry tries to solve common problems, everybody self-optimizes in ways that in aggregate surprise us all. It's now 90% of content is now running in CDNs. Of that, an amazing amount of content is running over QUIC. The network can't see the application. So here's another tension point. Previously, we used to think about content versus carriage. Should the content folk pay the carriage folk, or carriage folk pay the content? Big fights, decades long. But what we didn't realise is the real tension is inside the stack. Do applications go independent of the platform? Whose version of TCP should I use? And the previous one was, it was the platforms that ruled the roost. I need only point out that Microsoft was rich because of Windows. Word, Excel and so on were an afterthought. The platform was the money. But oddly enough, in today's world, the platform is nothing. It's valueless. Google give away Android, I believe. It's not valuable. Everything is in the app. And oddly enough, QUIC is not a service provided by your platform. It's the application going, I'm going to hide from everyone, including all the other applications that sit alongside me on the same platform. I'm going to hide myself so much that only Netflix clients can speak to Netflix servers. Good luck of trying to make something else speak to that server over there. No.
IPv4 and IPv6 have coexisted for a long time. Are they going to continue this way?
Well, the theoretical answer to your question is, we were not building a dual stack world. The answer was, we were building a V6 world, but it's not backwards compatible. So you've got to slide one in before the other one can die. Now, we've done this before. Does anyone remember DECnet or AppleTalk? The first network I built for the Australian university system and the first network the US built with NSFNet wasn't a single protocol network. It had OSI, CLNS or something. It was a dual stack. Might have even had a few more. In Australia, I built DECnet, X25, TCP/IP. Didn't build AppleTalk. But they died. Why? Because no one wanted them anymore. There was no demand. And so it was sort of driven by, well, how much traffic is there out there, right? So because V4 and V6 had to coexist for a while, and you can't just turn off V4, you have to make it so that there's no reason to keep on supporting it. Everything is on V6. So you've got this problem of collective action. When does this transition finish? Oddly enough, when everyone is running V6, there should be no further need for V4. Oh, great answer. But there are a number of things that V6 doesn't do well. If you push big answers through the DNS over V6, things break badly. You don't get answers. And so for a lot of the DNS world, it's kind of, till you fix those, my customers say, keep on running V4, make the answers fly, it's just the DNS, let's keep this happening. After, 25 years, we've almost talked ourselves into, well, it's dual stack forever. really? You've got to be joking. We can't keep this up. It's expensive. It's difficult. Oh, we're getting used to that. We're okay with this. And this is why I would actually argue, is that the right question? Because the other side of this is I keep on saying it's the content world and it's names. It's just names. And at some point, who needs addresses when you've got names? Why do I need globally unique addresses when there's very little global traffic anymore? And I would actually argue, by the time we slide out of addressing-based networks into a more elastic network based around the name of the service and its attributes, over the other side might well be a dual-stack network still going V6 someday, because it's hard to see how all of that gets resolved. While 2/3 of the world's users today, a lot of them, still don't have V6. And no one's cross-subsidising anyone here. Those 2/3 need to, their providers need to have their own motivation to do this. While that persists, it's never going to get resolved, And so it's hard to understand where you get the point of universal V6. And is the point of changing the architecture completely in a piecemeal basis that doesn't require orchestrated action a more likely outcome? At some point, I'm going to get an address based around an ephemeral token, which is between me and my content provider. And I might have multiple addresses because I might be going to different content data networks at the same time. But that address might well be reused in Newfoundland or even in Charlotte, here in North Carolina. It doesn't matter because their data center is not my data center. And you start talking about relative addressing. All of these concepts are in the mix. The concepts that win are the ones that have piecemeal adoption, don't require universal action, don't require coordination, it's a market, and tend to reward greater efficiencies and innovation. Markets that die actually require orchestration. We're all going to do this on a Tuesday, that kind of stuff. Too big for that. It's never going to happen. And so I kind of think that halcyon day, that, garden of earthly delights, when we're all just running V6, might never happen.
What's it like being the guy that mentions the elephant in the room? What is it like being that guy in this industry?
I suppose I've constantly sought out jobs where it wasn't my employer on the line. And I must admit, while I was working for a telephone company, sometimes life was very bitter. When I was inside a telephone company saying, you voice guys, you're living on borrowed life. It's all over. I got into a lot of trouble. And it's kind of, but it's true, obviously you're not allowed to say it. I now work for a company, APNIC, the address registry folk, who actually don't have a stake. They're a service for infrastructure. Now, yes, they run in addresses, and I'm saying, yeah, okay, it's not the job it was, and addresses don't matter. But I think that's a comfortable message. But someone's got to call it. Someone's got to say, this V6 transition has not only foundered, but lost its direction. And the folk who haven't done V6 aren't really hurting anyone. If that's not said, that we start being ruled by mythology. And $1 trillion industry, which, if you think about it, communication is what drives our societies and our enterprise, drives everything. If we start changing that industry to rely on mythology, lies, and not only truths, but just sheer fantasy, we're doing ourselves, our children, our societies a grave disservice. So I would say there's always got to be a re-evaluation, continue. What are we doing and why are we doing it? What makes these folk think content data networks are good? Why is this possible? And equally importantly, without any commercial interest, where is it leading? Not my direction or your direction or buy my product, but where is it leading? And if we can't listen to that, we're lost. We're completely lost. It's no longer a case of trust the telephone company, they know everything. We deregulated. We deregulated that knowledge. We deregulated that direction. We're driven by markets. So, the true answer is nobody knows. But the next thing is, if the market isn't informed and open, you're going to die. And you're going to bring down, because it's comms, it's everything, you're going to bring down a whole bunch of stuff with this. So in some ways, there need to be more folk willing to call it as they see it and say, this is what we understand to be happening. We need more economists, more data analysts who aren't just, how do I make my product brighter, shiny, or whatever, but what are we doing to ourselves and where does that lead? And if we're not doing that, we're going to suffer some really bad consequences. Can I make it more dire? I'm needed.
Geoff, you're an Internet Hall of Famer. You are well known globally in this industry. Why do you choose NANOG to come and present and talk to this particular community?
There are very few venues that have impact and repetition. And NANOG has always been, it was the first one to do this kind of meeting of folk with like interest in the infrastructure of the network. But it attracted a depth and quality of content that was self-perpetuating. So it got referenced. But there have been presentations at NANOG that certainly live in my mind years later. There have been some fibre optic ones where this guy described all the Nobel Prizes that have been awarded in the evolution of fibre optics. This is amazing stuff. It gets repeated. It has impact. NANOG called it, I think, almost unconsciously. Around 10 years ago, the presentation stopped being about transit and peering and started being about the architecture of data centres. And that got me thinking, why did the program committee think that was what people wanted to hear? What's wrong with routing, transit and peering? The answer really was, we're not interested anymore. As an industry, it's not what drives us here. What we want to talk about is what we're now building. And I would actually argue it was that choice that, certainly in my mind, started me thinking, well, transit's dead. Transit's gone. Death of transit, because NANOG's not talking about it. Who is talking about it? And so if you kind of go, what's the role of NANOG? It's part of this, the choices they make in their program are reflective of the choices individual players are making in their offerings and architecture. And if you look hard at that, I think you gain insights which are really difficult from reading the trade rags. Because the trade rags don't put their finger on the pulse. But NANOG has to get people to come. The program has to be attractive and timely, and that actually reflects the topics that are the topics we want to talk about. And so for that reason, I think it's deeply impactful.
What was your first name on?
Oh, geez, you've got me. I know I came and presented around 2005. I don't think I went before then.
Why do you think it's important that NANOG exists?
When we got rid of the orchestrated, regulated telephone industry, we got rid of the orchestrator. In other words, you built to telephone industry specs. The telephone people talk to each other, they put out a specification, providers built to that spec. So stuff interoperated by order, by demand, by decree. And so the network was cohesive because someone was in charge. What was dimly understood by regulators, or perhaps not at all, is when you deregulated, you got rid of orchestration. And the risk is complete chaos. My widget is my widget and it doesn't interact with anyone else's, you should buy my widget. It's exactly the same as the first decade of the telephone industry, where back in the 1880s, every telephone was different, didn't interoperate. How do you actually get some degree of collective direction? Now, the IETF would argue it's standards. Everyone reads the standards, everyone obeys the standards. And I would argue, not really. They're just guidelines. What matters is the folk doing the work, understanding what their peers are doing and why. That collective consciousness at the engineering level, oddly enough, is what keeps us in a far more cohesive model of building a single technical artifact than the paperwork coming out of the IETF. Now, I know I've just, dissed the IETF pretty quickly, but nevertheless, it's true. Companies are people. They're not their product. They're people. And NANOG is more about the people and about making those connections. If I want to convince someone of the true value of BGP is dead, I can either say it, in my bedroom going, BGP is dead, or I can actually come to NANOG and go, guys, you really should think about where we are and try and understand why I'm saying this and reflect to yourself, how much should I be involved in the data center CDN world? Where's it going? And what's the architecture of that new world? Should I get to know about the DNS? It's really should. Because I think those kinds of conversations matter. Where do I find them? Oddly enough, I find them at NANOG. I find those conversations here. So if it wasn't here, where would it be?
Our conference is unique in our audience being mostly network engineers. What makes our community unique to you?
Actually, the same thing. It's the folk doing the network engineering and their supply chains. So it's not just, I bought some product and I've made it work. It's, I'm building product, what do you guys need? Mm-hmm. And it's oddly enough that pairing of provider and consumer at the engineering level, mm-hmm. which is the combination that matters. Mm-hmm. So when I'm doing a presentation about, well, how big will BGP be in 5 years? I'm actually not really speaking to the folk running routers per se. I'm speaking to the folk building routers. Mm-hmm. Because down their product line better be something that copes with a 5 to 10 year projection, mm-hmm. or your product's going to die an early and ignominious death out there in the field. So it's that build of both engineers on product and engineers on operations mm-hmm. that makes that kind of meeting place unique.
I know that you're a wonderful storyteller, so I'm very curious. Do you have any personal memories of something that happened during a NANOG social, or after the presentation, or something that really stood out attending a meeting?
It was more of the technical moment of truth. I've been working on some V6 work around site multi-homing. Mm-hmm. And, we were down there deep in the weeds of, here's this network and it's attached to multiple providers, and here's a technical solution to make it work. And, a long exposition of the NANOG. I think it might have been even in the one in Hollywood back in 2005. And it's kind of, well, isn't this great? And the audience, which a lot of operators, said, no, it absolutely stinks. You've got us completely wrong and we're never going to deploy it. And it's that bitter pill of honest truth that said, I'm not going to let my customers determine how to steer my traffic that I'm paying for. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of, you're right. Mm-hmm. I can't argue with that. Mm-hmm. That course correction of going, great in theory, but understand the practice. Mm-hmm. And what I'd like about NANOG, and what I find, I suppose, in some ways frustrating about many other venues, is when you're wrong in NANOG, you know it. There's a brutal honesty in that question line, a brutal and direct honesty. And dare I say it, there's no pretensions of politeness. Wrong is wrong. Now, we've tried to be nicer to each other in recent years, and you kind of go, I think I prefer direct honesty in many ways. I'd like to understand why I'm wrong, not to have my ego gently stroked saying, good try, Geoff. If you're wrong, you're wrong. And that's what I really like and appreciate about NANOG, that I found the American culture when I first came into sort of these venues, the microphone line, you're asking the speaker a question. Isn't that disrespectful? And you kind of get to the fact that in the NANOG culture, we actually are all equal. And it's a broader thing about this society, but we're all equal. And the people at the microphone, yes, it might be a bit of a cat and mouse game about are you speaking lies, but at the same time, it's an honest and direct feedback. It's an unfiltered, this is what I heard you say, this is my reaction, this is, take this. And I think that's actually right and it's honest. And I like that. I enjoy the sparring. And whether it's, well, have you thought about X, Y, and Z? Yes, I have. And I enjoy the sparring, but at the same time, I also enjoy the brutal and direct honesty of, we're not going to just, yes, very good, clap, clap, clap. But, what have you really said? And is it true? Does it work? I enjoy that feedback. I think it's honest.
I like what what you said. It's very true about our NANOG community. I think that's a great summarization. What do you really want this community to know about where they should be taking action right now to build a better internet of tomorrow?
I've heard the same question sort of phrased differently, but it's the same kind of question. You know, if the world's going to be dominated by Google, Meta, you know, and so on, and Amazon, the big giants, what's the point? Yes, let them do it. Mm-hmm. You go, but it's not them. Mm-hmm. It's you. Mm-hmm. If you go and get a job with Google, get a job with Meta, mm-hmm. you're part of them. Mm-hmm. You're part of their search for products, directions in the future that make sense to the service industry. Understand that and build and help build the company you'd like it to be. I didn't go and join Telstra because I thought telephones were cool. I got bought up and went into them to destroy them because I thought the internet was so much better and this telephone stuff had reached its use-by date. And it was people like me that changed that company into a different company. So I'd actually argue the future is what we as people make of it. Companies don't have an independent existence. They're the sum of all these employees, all of these people. And if companies refuse to listen to their employees, things get pretty bad pretty quickly, as we've seen when it happens. So have an attitude, have a belief. You haven't sold your soul to go and work for anyone. Maintain your vision inside that. It might be influenced, it might be corrected, but you join them to do a good job. Do your work in the way you want to see it done and influence those around you in that. And collectively, hopefully, you'll do what customers want from you.
So start small to make a big impact, or work local to make a global impact.
Work in your workplace. You're just you. You don't need to lead the company to influence it. You need to do a good job of your values, work in areas that you think are worth doing because the outcome is a better service, a better thing. And if you do that, and everyone does that, oddly enough, you're focusing on things that matter. Google will never change. Oh, they will. Because the lifetime of people working for them is quite small. The entire workforce gets revolved in, say, 25 years easily. It changes to reflect the attitudes of the employees more than anything. They're the people doing the job. So I'd actually argue it's fine to work for big or small. Small gets you more latitude, but it's harder to get things done. Big, it seems more constraining, but it's actually not. It's actually not constraining. You have a much bigger ability to influence. And so it's some ways more liberating. You actually have the wherewithal and resources to convince your peers, let's go down this direction and let's make it work. So don't be scared of doing that either. And it's hearing those various experiences at NANOG, large and small, that I think helps you get confidence in being a part of the industry, not merely an observer.
I really appreciate what you're saying. You can make impact wherever you are.
We don't understand this technology.
Yeah.
We're all complete neophytes in all this. Yeah. We're only dimly understanding of how the DNS works, let alone routing. Mm-hmm. It's all a black art. Mm-hmm. It's not pre-written. You know, we're lucky enough, and I think it's an amazing time in this industry. You can talk to VidServe. Why'd you do that? I talked to Paul Mocker-Petras last week, the architect of the DNS. Why did you pick 512 bytes, Paul? What was in your brain at the time, back in 1970 Mumble? Why did you do that? In 20 years' time, well, okay, Paul, 50. In a period of time in the future, he won't be around, neither will I probably. You can't ask the question. You can only ask the historical record. But right now, send a mail, talk to them. Why'd you do that? And kind of, that's actually quite unique. It's brilliant.
It is brilliant. That's a wonderful way to describe that. And we don't think about that. We don't really take up the opportunity that is.
We got so used to training in the internet. Here's how to do this, here's how to do that we gave the impression that the internet is stone tablets. Mm-hmm. But oddly enough, technology is a conversation. Why'd you choose it that way? Oh, it was a Tuesday and we just wanted to get out of the room. Oh, so you mean it's a malleable decision? Yeah, you could do it a different way. Technology is a conversation. We don't understand it. And there are so many aspects you don't understand. None of us. Yeah. It's not just, well, that's a mystery to everyone, but, well, we just made decisions. And if you regard technology as a conversation, if you regard it as something that you start to get enough of the vocabulary and terms that you can argue with it as much as with others. Why do it this way? Why not do it that way? And that's the reason why most of us keep on attending the IETF, for that conversation. This sort of negotiating with, well, you didn't understand at the time, is there a better way of doing it now? And that's why the internet keeps on evolving, because we haven't got it right. We don't understand it. It's kind of, we're grappling with the big beast. And, you know, everyone's got something to contribute in that kind of picture.
Technology is a conversation. I love that. When you think about the beginnings of the internet, it's very much like what you're talking about, where it wasn't this, you know, it's been that way. It's been historically this thing of collaboration, of conversation, of request to comment.
Yes. It was always a more humble thing, and it wasn't a finished product. And there's a lot of folk going, it's just a finished product. Here is the way you do it. It's like, no, it's not. It's just a guideline. It's just a conversation. It's a conversation starter. You don't have to do it that way. Understand the consequences, but let's talk about it. Let's see what other alternatives are there. Could they have been better?
It brings it down to something that feels like you can make impact. I think so much we feel like, you know, with like imposter syndrome and just the nature of the industry. But like, there's a lot of people that, oh, I don't know if I should step in or say that because what do I know? And this really opens the gate. So for my final question, thank you so much for joining us, by the way. What is NANOG to you?
I've always found it a friendly bunch of my peers. I'm not sure all of them are research scientists, but it's a bunch of people who obsess about the same industry I obsess about. It's my tribe. And, you know, in Australia, where my tribe is actually quite small, it's fun, but it's small. NANOG gets exposed to almost a global tribe of you know, people like me. Like it or not. And to me, it's my people. It's my tribe. It's, you know, my peers. And I'd hope that most other folk who come here keep on coming to meetings. You know? Through thick and thin, I'm coming to a NANOG, have the same kind of feeling.